Okay, so a real quick tutorial on how to take your no-knead dough and turn it into a stromboli. So basically it's just stuffed bread rolled up and baked like a big fat baguette, but there's meat, cheese, vegetables, whatever you want to put in it. Tonight I have just sauteed up some good grass-fed beef from my brother that he gave us, and some onions sauteed with that, a little bit of garlic chopped in. I did some salt and pepper, and I did do some seasoning, I think some oregano, whatever I felt like doing. And now all I'm going to do is work with my no-knead dough to put it in with some cheese into the middle and roll it up. So you have to already know this recipe. This has been fermenting overnight. It's a double batch, so I'm going to set a batch aside because I am going to do English muffins as well, which I'll do another tutorial for that here, maybe after this. Look for that if I haven't already done it yet. I always make a double batch of dough when I'm working with the dough because we have a huge family. So last night I put up, or you could do it this morning, 3 cups of flour per batch with combined 2 teaspoons of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. Add up to 2 teaspoons yeast if you're going to do it the same day, if you don't have overnight to let it ferment. And then I'm going to stir, then I stirred in a 1.5 cups of water. That's for a single batch. So I just doubled this, okay? And I covered it tight overnight and let it sit for anywhere from 8 to 12, 18 hours. And now it's smelling a little bit fermented. It's got some nice bubbles in it, you can see. So it's ready to rock and roll. I just scoop the double batch out into one big lump rather than divide it. It's a no-knead dough, so we're not going to work it very much. Working with no-knead dough or sourdoughs, they're wetter, for absolute sure. So you just got to get used to that. We're not going to be kneading in a bunch of flour. We just take the flour and we just dust it around so you have a smooth, non-sticky surface of the dough, just the surface, okay? We're not going to let any of this flour go into it. I will just flip it over all in one big lump. Okay, I'm going to be dividing my dough in half because this was a double batch. So now I can feel there's no sticky points. If there is, I give it a little flour. Sometimes just flour from the pan alone. I usually work within an edged pan so that I can confine the mess in my home. So I'm going to make it look kind of uniform just so I can get a good even split. I'm going to set aside half of this dough because it was the double. Okay, I'm going to flour the edges because that will be sticky. And I'm just going to set it in the very bowl that it worked in. It fermented in overnight. Alright, set that aside. I'll make English muffins with that later. Alright, so I can flour this side too. Alright, now again, I'm going to divide this dough in half. This is a single batch. This is what you get if you put up the 3 cups of flour, the 2 teaspoons of salt, and the 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. Or if you did a shorter rise time, you would add more yeast. And then the 1.5 cups of water. And this is King Arthur flour, unbleached. It's not bromated. It's the best. It won't work the same. You will not get the same results if you use like a no-name brand flour that's been treated. So this is the result. No stick, no knead dough. Just let it sit overnight. I'm going to cut it in half, single batch. Okay, because I'm going to make 2 strombolis. It just makes everything way easier to work with. So I can set this aside. Okay, right now I'm actually going to sit it. I don't want it to be on top of that dough. I'm going to sit it on my counter because they'll stick together. All I'm going to do is act like when you're making a pizza or you're making the English muffins. I'm pressing it out. Okay, I've got a pan. My oven's on 450. The loaves of bread cook at 450. The baguettes, double baguettes, you can get 2 baguettes out of one batch. They cook at 450. Both of those are for 25 minutes, but if you're cooking one single loaf for the artisan loaf, then you cook it in a Dutch oven so it's covered. The baguettes you also cover for 25 minutes, and then you're done. You maybe brown the top for a few minutes when you take the cover off, whereas the full-size loaf, you're going to uncover for another 10 to 15 to get it nice and brown and crisp. So right now, I'm going to let that like rest a little bit, okay? So I've got 2 that I need to make. So just to show you, I will use my table surface, which is so rare. So I can make 2 because I like to have it rest while I'm making the other one. when you let the rest sit for a few minutes, now you can come back and work with it a lot easier. I'm sorry my head gets cut off, but this way you can see where I'm working. Someday I'll get one of those portals or something so it'll move with me. So I'll go back and forth between the two. I just don't want it to stick too much to my surface. And sometimes you have to do this stretch and hold. That's how I get my pizzas done real quick, the stretch and hold. You have to train the dough to behave. It wants to kind of go back into its old way. It needs some reminders. There's a spiritual lesson in there, I'm sure of that. All right, so this one I can work with again. You're just looking for some type of rectangle. It will stretch and move as you're working with it to stuff it, okay? So I just have a plain pan over here. I'm going to use a roasting pan today. These cook uncovered because we're looking for a crisp top. So because I've chosen to do kind of like a greasy dish, I'm just going to stick some mayonnaise on it. I don't have sauce, all right? You could do this like calzone style. Think red sauce, all right? I need something oily in here, something to make it moist inside. So I'm just gonna plop on some mayonnaise. Just spread that out because I feel like that goes good. It's kind of like a Philly cheesesteak taste I've got going on. I do not take it to the edges. And again, I know these do not look like perfectly square or big enough. They're gonna stretch as I pull them into kind of the log, the baguette that I'm gonna be making. I'm gonna get some of that in there. And even doing this, I'm able to push it out to the edges. Okay, you could do this with a red sauce. You could do this with mustard if you wanted to do like a ham and cheddar. Right, and you'll be able to stretch it as you roll it. Can you see this one? So I'm just using mayonnaise because it's a good flavor. Sometimes my husband and I like things spicy. I'll use a sandwich spread in here, or I'll use banana peppers. A sandwich spread being like hot pepper sandwich spread. Something a little zingy and tangy, or I'll shake some red peppers. This is mostly for little kids tonight, so they don't want anything spicy. Again, I'm careful not to take it to the edge because the edges will make it leak and you'll have cheese stinking up your house, burning in the pan. I cook it sometimes in a cast iron, which is also really nice to cook in. All right, so that's done. All I'm gonna do, I'm gonna use mozzarella. I'm going to spread some cheese on first. This is frozen, so it comes out a big lump. I'm going to spread it on first and last. So half my cheese will go on first, and the other half will go on next. You can make it as cheesy as you want. You can throw vegetables in. I'm not going to do that tonight, keeping it simple for my children. You could also just stir the cheese right into your meat that you have cooked up. Try to keep all that good meat. I have a friend, she made chicken Alfredo filling, and I've done something like that too. I had a leftover potato garlic soup, and I realized that I had volunteered to cook for a game night dinner for my son's varsity soccer team, and I was like, oh crud, I didn't want to go to the store, but I had bread dough up, and I had leftovers. I'm like, what can I roll up in some bread? So basically, all I did was I took the soup and thickened it, and I did put in some sauteed ground beef, and I rolled that up, and it was on a hit. They loved this soup was right in there. It's just really thick. So whatever you want to put in there. Creamy, you can break all the rules. It doesn't have to be like pizza. Okay, so all I'm going to do, this is the careful part, and this is the problem with the no-knead dough that people find. It can be really tricky to maneuver because it's a wetter dough. It's not stiff, it's not dry, we're not using a ton of flour. You might have to use flour. I kind of roll it over, and I keep holding it. Now I might have to use floured hands. Oh, I forgot, I usually put cheese on top. Now you can also use like Parmesan. I put cheese on both sides because it helps it to stick. Melts together, it just cooks a lot nicer. A little cheese on top, seals it up. All right, let me get this out of the way so you can see. All right, so I have to have floured hands so I can encourage it to get off of the tabletop here. And I kind of move the dough over and I stick it to itself. You're gonna have to fold the ends over, and yes, the ends are gonna be bready. And I'll teach you a little hint with those. Keep putting the filling in and kind of bring it so it has a seam, and you zip it up. All right, zip it up together. So bring the dough on top of itself and squeeze it together so you'll create a seam. Now see how this surface wasn't as floured as this one was because I put it out there so I can be efficient. I usually don't like to work on my counter because it's harder to clean. So you have to make sure those stick. Now, if you get rips or tears, you know it's going to leak. So how do you deal with that? And then I just sort of shape it here and I make sure I have not sticking. Use floured hands so it's not sticking. Okay, so I can move it and I've zippered it up. Okay, and maybe it's going to come apart, so I kind of watch it. Okay, and if I have any leaks or holes, I'll tell you what I do because it's kind of thin. I can feel the stuffing right there. You can cut off, because this end had so much extra dough. Look at that, it didn't even cut into that. So now I have some extra dough. Now I don't really have a true hole, but I would get a little bit of water. Will help it to stick. I'll find that thinner spot where it might break free, and I'll give it a little patch. It'll cook right in. You'll hardly know it's there. If you put a little water on it, it'll stay. Then you won't have a leaker. But that's where you can do. You can get the ends is where like there's extra dough. Okay? So now, get rid of this. The transfer is tricky. So if you have a spatula, use that. Use that. It's an extra set of hands. You want to put it down on the zipper seam, okay? So you might have to flop it and kind of roll it over. It's just a dry pan. I don't want it to be greasy in here because it'll roll, it'll flatten out. I don't want it to stick, so I gave it a little flour. I was trying to stick where I had that fresh little patch on. Okay? So then I can just kind of change the shape of it if I don't like the way it looks. Okay, I will brush these with a little milk, makes them a little crisper on top. Right, so I'm going to switch this over so you can hopefully see better. Okay, so now I'm going to go again, make sure there's nothing on the edges. I'm going to encourage it to come in the top. This one's easier because it was well floured underneath. All right, then I've got to pull. There's a lot of dough here, so I can pull it over. Okay, this one's a better setup than that one was. I was a little more prepared for this one. All right, so now it's laying on top of itself. I'll close up the seams here so nothing sticks out as I squeeze it. I'm going to kind of shape it. I'm going to kind of move the filling to fill out evenly. Okay, once the ends have been sit over. And I'm going to keep squeezing and making that zipper here. Yeah, I'm making something to eat right now. Look at this. So I have a thin spot. Right here, I can see the meat is trying to poke through. It's kind of thinner. So that's when I take, yeah, you're on TV right now. I cut off that end and see it didn't go through. And if it started to, I just squeeze it. Yeah, why don't you take these right here, okay? There you go. All right, we'll go look in the pantry. I'm almost done. And then I'll take this, I'll flatten it out a little bit. I got a little patch. Find my thin spot. I will wet that. You can just wet the whole piece of dough. I just wet this under the water. And I kind of spread it over that patch so I won't have a leak. Mom, and then I'll take some...
Now some potato chips.
Not right now, baby. All right, so all I'm going to do here is use my extra hand. And this is the zipper seam, so I want it to be underneath. Yeah, when I'm done, this will be all done. This only takes like 20 minutes to cook, and you'll be having dinner. And so what I'll do next is I just kind of shape it. Look for thin spots, wet a little patch by cutting one off in the end. Make sure your ends are sealed. Okay? They can rise for a little while like this. If you want to pre-make them before dinner, they get a lot bigger. You'll have a lot more breading. But I can cook them right now. 450 for about 20 to 23, 24 minutes usually in my oven at 450. Before these guys go in, I let them rest just for a few minutes. But like I said, you can let them rest for longer just so the seams will seal nicely. And I'm going to brush them with a little bit of milk. Helps. And you can sprinkle on a little Parmesan cheese on top. You do not need to vent them. They'll be just perfect the way they are. They'll steam cook really nicely. And you'll be able to eat them shortly after they come out of the oven. You can slice right through them when they've cooled for a few minutes. And you'll be good to go. Crisp outside. But it won't, because you're not cooking them in a closed space, you won't have a really thick crust like when you make the artisan loaf. That cooks in a Dutch oven for 25 minutes and then 10, 15 off. This is just going to cook open topped. Even the baguettes, normally I cover for 25 minutes, but these I leave open because I want the crust to be thinner but crisp, if that makes sense. More like a calzone crust. So that's that. There they go. I'll put a picture later on. Bye-bye.